Good afternoon, everyone. It is February 15th, looking at Ukraine and going to talk about a battlefield update for what is going on between Russia and Ukraine, specifically in Avdiivka, as this is the main focal point. Now, we see a lot of dots in this map, and I haven't included these dots before, but these are geolocations for Ukrainian and Russian units. So, not necessarily units, but Russian potentially flags or indications that Russia or Ukraine has been operating in that area. Now, when you look at it, you see a lot of blue, that's Ukraine, and then all the red, that is Russia. Now, specifically looking at what's happening in Avdiivka, we see that mainly the Russians have taken a significant amount of territory. Now, all this purple right here is what is identified as potential Russian territory that has been taken from the Ukrainians. And so it becomes pretty obvious as we zoom in here what the plan for Russia is to do. They're trying to basically abandon the double envelopment that was originally pushing this way across the countryside and instead seeking a more manageable double envelopment or pincer move. And that would be they've moved outward to take the flanks of the city, kind of splitting it somewhat, then pushing this way along this road here, and they will pivot downward and essentially try to meet these 2 points up and then taking the entire city here. And that's kind of the tactic they're looking at. So when you zoom in even further, you can kind of see that Russia has pushed definitely to this point here. Now we see this red dot here, and that is a Russian flag that allegedly was planted. The image is a bit fuzzy, but I don't consider that to be, this is as far as Russia has gone. We do have geolocated confirmation that Ukraine is still operating in these two areas here as well as down here. So when you look at this one dot, I kind of am thinking that the way this is working is this is all gray zone, meaning it has not technically been taken by anyone officially yet, but Russia certainly has not moved past here to hold this territory. That being said, this situation is becoming more and more precarious for Ukraine every hour. The failings here are not on the Ukrainians. This is a failing in the West and to provide the necessary military aid for Ukraine to conduct counter-battery fire and the other things necessary to maintain the type of defense that was originally being worked here. This is a highly dynamic environment, and the trajectory of the battle suggests an inevitable withdrawal of Ukraine with the imminent fall of this town. Now, this town before the war held 31,000 troops. This isn't necessarily a strategic location. The Russians already held the strategic point for where the area around this town, and that is this crossroads, and this crossroads involves rail as well. So this town doesn't necessarily provide a whole lot, but what it was a political victory for Vladimir Putin. He can go into these elections coming up if this town falls and say they took this quote-unquote major town that had a population of 31,000 and use it as election fodder, essentially. Say, look at what we're doing. We're making progress. And that is why there's a massive push here, and it is taking a mammoth toll on the Russians. The Russians have had to repurpose a lot of people, a lot of equipment from other units. Currently, the units that are operating in this area for Russia are the 2nd and 41st Combined Arms Armies, but they have been so heavily attrited that an entire other Combined Arms Army for Russia, the 25th, has been redeployed here and just to backfill those two armies with equipment and personnel. And much of the personnel are just that kind of human wave tactic, very low level trained personnel that are struggling to break through. But when you throw enough of them at the problem and compound that with the lack of support coming from the West to Ukraine, this becomes a situation that Ukraine is likely going to have to move on from in the near future. What's interesting is some of the recruits that have come from Russia had just joined in December or January. Approximately 10 of them were inmates recruited in mid-January and are on the front line within just a few weeks. Unfortunately for the city itself, it's just essentially gone. This has been a battlefield for many months, and there's nothing really here for them to plant a flag in, so to speak, other than the rubble. So unfortunately, as I said before, it looks like the Ukrainians will have to withdraw here. Now, I would say this isn't going to be a rapid withdrawal for the Ukrainians. What will likely happen is they will slowly withdraw to Avdiivka, and potentially there's river systems here that they could withdraw to as well, and we potentially could see the Russians form a new front line along somewhere in here, potentially up here, but they could stop in Lastochkine here and potentially hold and try to form a new bow that the Russians have to deal with. But that being said, nonetheless, there will be a slow withdrawal trying to attrit the Russian forces as they move into the cities. But that becomes very difficult because the Ukrainians are running low on ammunition, critically low on ammunition, due to the failings of the United States and the Western world to continue to bolster their capability in the face of the criminal invader that is Russia.